Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our press conference. We are live at the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development. And I would like to introduce the Minister of Labor and Small Enterprise Development, who would speak to us about workplace guidelines with regards to the closure of schools.
Thank you, Minister Cox, my cabinet colleagues. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Minister of Communication, Donald Cox, the Chief Personnel Officer, Commander Daryl Dindial, our Permanent Secretary, right here at the Ministry of Labor, Ms. Natalie Willis, our Executive Director of OSHA, Ms. Carolyn Sancho, Major General Retired Rodney Smart, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the ODPM, and on my right, Mr. Val Lewis, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Security, and County Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Bess, other senior officials and other members of staff of the Ministry of Labor, members of the media, thank you so very much for being here. Good morning and welcome. We cannot commence this media conference without, first of all, expressing our deep appreciation to all of you, and especially you, the members of the media, for responding so readily to our invitation, not only to be here on a Sunday morning, but to have done so much at such short notice. It is a cogent manifestation of your patriotism, your dedication, and your commitment to the overall welfare and well-being of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and to bring the people of Trinidad and Tobago information on this pandemic. Members of the media, COVID-19 has plunged the world at large into an extraordinary difficult dilemma. On exceptionally rare occasions like these, governments all over the world, irrespective of socioeconomic standing, abundance of power, or capacity of might, governments the world over are called upon to take very difficult, demanding, bold, decisive decisions in defense of the safety, security, and protection of their citizenry. We, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, never exempt ourselves. We have become renowned and respected at sparing no effort in rallying to each and every call. And so, in keeping with this government's policy, and in particular the well-established determination of our Honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, to lead by example, we are here once again, this time to provide guidelines to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago as the country continues to grapple with the unusual and unfortunate circumstances forced upon us by the COVID-19 pandemic. The guidelines we are about to share with the population at large are designed to mitigate the obvious personal and family logistical inconveniences and the consequential significant workplace adjustments which are expected to be faced as a result of the inevitable decision which had to be taken to have our schools and universities closed for 1 week in the first instance. Ladies and gentlemen, further to the statement made by the Honorable Prime Minister on March 13, 2020, that all schools will be closed for 1 week in the first instance, starting Saturday, March 14, 2020. It is recognized that there are parents who are also workers who tomorrow, Monday, 16 March 2020, will be faced with the question of what to do with respect to the children who will be out of schools, and there are employers who will be faced with requests from employees to bring their children to work or stay at home. In dealing with this situation at the workplace, employers and employees in the public service, state enterprises, private sector advised to utilize these following guidelines. 1. At this time, it is not advised that children be allowed into workplaces, work facilities, inclusive of company vehicles or compounds, as they too need to be protected. 2. All parents are encouraged to use their support systems in the first instance to take care of their children to allow them to report for duty. 3. Employers are encouraged to implement remote work policies where possible to minimize the need for employees with children to physically attend work. 4. Where it is not possible for employees with children to work from home, recognized majority unions or employees and the employers are required to explore options of shift work, staggered hours of work, and or rostering. 5. Where there are both parents in a family, one parent is encouraged to stay at home with the children while the other one reports for duty. 6. Where alternative work arrangements cannot be made, the employee is to be allowed to stay at home with his or her children without being penalized by either disciplinary action or by non-payment of salary. 7. Where discussions between the recognized majority unions or the employees and employers have failed to resolve the issue, either the employer or the recognized majority union or the employee can contact the Conciliation, Advisory and Advocacy Division at the Ministry of Labor at conciliation.mol@gov.tt or call 299-0300 extension 2043 or 2124. 8. Employees are advised, if you are not sick, do not stay away from work. For the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, employers are required to implement pandemic leave provisions within their organizations in a compassionate manner, which ensures business continuity while securing the national interest. In light of the pandemic facing Trinidad and Tobago, officers who will be eligible for pandemic leave within the public service are as follows. 1. Public officers, whether you are permanent or temporary, monthly paid and daily rated. 2. Fixed-term contract employees. 3. Short-term contract employees. 4. On-the-job trainees. 5. Office holders within the purview of the Salary Reviews Commission, whose office falls in the public service, such as top managers in the judiciary and legal services. Employers are encouraged to develop appropriate arrangements to ensure business continuity during this pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, workers, employers, unions, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, let's face the reality. We are all in this together. The perils of COVID-19 and the attendant dislocations brought upon our country demanded we, all of us, the government, the opposition, the citizenry, join forces with one another to combat this menace. Together, we must grapple with the unprecedented peculiarities and idiosyncrasies of this unusual virus, which is sweeping the world as we speak. And so, with an abiding spirit of collaboration, cooperation, and commitment on the part of all citizens, whatever our personal, religious, political persuasions may be, let us lift our hearts and double our efforts as we journey through these turbulent waters together. On the bright side, with the grace of Almighty God, or whatever your superior being within your religious denomination, And with that relentless spirit of togetherness, we will emerge out of this pandemic a nation excessively stronger in purposefulness and more abundantly enlightened and enriched from this experience. We thank you, members of the media, for continuing to be on the ball with us. We invite your assistance in communicating to the population at large the information which we have shared with you this morning. I wish to thank you all, and may Almighty God continue to bless us all and protect us as together we battle this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. At this time, Commander Daryl Dindial, Chief Personnel Officer, will explain pandemic leave and how it will operate.
Thank you, Minister. So, in the public service, there are currently leave provisions for sick leave and for extensions of sick leave for monthly paid workers and for daily paid workers and even for workers in the protective services. But there are categories of workers where no leave provisions exist. For example, short-term employees and temporary workers who have less than 1 year service. The Committee of Cabinet Ministers, supported by the technical officers, would have considered all categories of workers. Pandemic leave is a new category of leave that is being proposed to treat with the absence of duty in this particular circumstance. And why that is important is any absence of duty has to be classified because it has an impact on the calculation of pensions, gratuity, acting appointments, and increments. The intent is for none of those things to be impacted. So there is a provision where we have to make sure that heads of department, permanent secretaries, statutory authorities under the Statutory Authorities Act and the Tobago House of Assembly, those persons who are charged with the responsibility of administrating leave of absence from duty has the appropriate guidance to classify that leave of absence. So pandemic leave is a leave that is being recommended, a classification of leave for this particular circumstance. The intent is not to utilize this except if another circumstance like this arises. It is something to ensure that workers are accounted for if they are not able to come to work, and there are no impact, no secondary to other impact on the ability for the calculation of pensions or any other entitlements with regard to the classification of leave. So it is something that is being proposed in a guideline document that we expect to submit to Cabinet later this week.
Thank you very much. To the point. So folks, we open the floor for questions.
Hi, good day, Ryan Hamilton Davis, Newsday. Well, we know for the moment schools being closed and so on is only actually just for this week until further notice at the very least. I don't think we haven't had any kind of information of anything going further. But this issue of pandemic leave and also the arrangements that are to be made for parents of children who are in schools, can these policies be used beyond this weekly closure of school, if by chance it has to close for another week, another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or even further? Because we know even Italy has their entire system on a certain amount of lockdown. Schools are not being open for weeks now. So how far could this go?
Very, very clearly, once schools remain closed, these guidelines will continue to be in operations.
Good morning, Derek Atchong from Guardian Media. I don't know if Mr. Dindial or the Minister can explain who qualifies for this pandemic leave. Is it a situation where if it's someone who is quarantined, who is ordered to be self-isolated, is it that somebody who is tested will qualify for this leave, this extended leave, or is it does this apply to persons who don't have an option in terms of grandmother, a mother to take care of their children, a support system, if that will apply to them in that circumstance?
I will invite the Chief Personnel Officer to respond to that.
Thank you, Minister. So there are current provisions right now for public officers that have sick leave eligibility. If somebody, it is recommended that if somebody is tested positive. Thank you. It is recommended that if somebody has tested positive for COVID-19 they utilize their sick leave eligibility. Where that sick leave eligibility is exhausted, there are mechanisms in place that currently exist for extensions of sick leave. They will go ahead to proceed on that. There are categories of workers that do not have sick leave eligibility. If those individuals are tested positive in the workplace for COVID-19, they could utilize pandemic leave. In the current circumstance, in view that schools are closed in the next week, in the first instance, those workers who are exercising a responsibility, if they don't have a mechanism, a support mechanism, and they don't report a duty, pandemic leave is recommended for those classification of workers who will not be coming to work.
So I guess in a situation where someone may have used up some of their leave this year, and they need to
qualify. What leave are you referring to?
Like sick leave. In a situation where someone was ill earlier in the year and they used 10 days, for example, and now that they would need 14 days out, then they will qualify for the pandemic leave, I'm guessing.
If they don't qualify for extensions of sick leave. So anybody who doesn't qualify for extensions of sick leave, or if you're a contract officer and they don't qualify for leave of absence on the grounds of illness, you could qualify for pandemic leave.
As an addendum to what the CPO said, for example, in the public service, we have a category of staff who are known to be short-term contract employees. They do not enjoy the facility of sick leave. So should any of these officers find himself or herself in such a situation, then it is recommended that pandemic leave be utilized.
Before your question, please, there is a question from social media, and they have asked if this is state enterprise workers. Are they under this? Are they covered?
It is recommended as well for state enterprise.
Okay, Ryan Hamilton Davis again from the Newsday. Seeing that that some may have to use their sick leave on this occasion, using up their sick leave, and we know that the incubation period is about 14 days, which is around the average amount of time for sick leave. After the fact, if when this finally blows over, if a person has to acquire more sick leave, what happens then? Would they be subject to reprimand? Would they be not allowed to use their sick leave, or what would happen at that point?
Okay, thank you. And just to go back to Minister Scott's question with the state enterprises would normally have sick leave eligibility, and so it is recommended that persons who are in those enterprises utilize the sick leave eligibility in the first instance, and they may have provisions as well for extensions of sick leave. So they will manage that. If they don't have extensions of sick leave in those enterprises, the pandemic leave provision would apply. So if somebody has 14 days sick leave, generally that is the amount of sick leave that is individual qualifies for. If you have exhausted 4 of those days, for example, and you only have 10 days remaining, and you have tested positive for COVID-19, you proceed on those 10 days, you still require an additional 4 days in the first instance for the 14 days. If you do not have a mechanism based on the classification of employee you are to go on extended sick leave, pandemic leave would come into place. The idea is to ensure the existing mechanisms we have in place, which is sick leave eligibility, extensions of sick leave, and if you're a contract fixed-term employee, leave of absence on the ground of illness, those mechanisms are continue to be utilized. In the absence of qualifying for those things, pandemic leave will apply. So all categories of workers will not have a challenge in being away from the workforce and would not have any loss of income within this period. So either you're on sick leave, you're on extensions of sick leave, or if you're a fixed-term contract employee, you're on leave of absence on grounds of illness. If you're a short-term employee that doesn't have any provisions at this point in time, you're on pandemic leave.
And moreover, we want to convey that it is understood that this is a highly unusual global situation. It's not a situation where an individual, by his or her own conduct, would access sick leave. This is a world pandemic we are dealing with. And while we encourage employers from the private sector to be compassionate and to be flexible in terms of understanding the situation, On the other hand, we would want to call upon workers to act responsibly under these conditions. And if you're not sick, do not stay away from the job. But there are other guidelines that will be shared with you all, because these guidelines, these draft guidelines, they now have to be reviewed by the National Tripartite Advisory Council, of which the business sector and labor form strategic partners in that tripartite arrangement. And I do believe they will be having a review of this document either tomorrow or Tuesday. And as soon as that review is through, the document, draft policy guidelines in preparing workplaces in Trinidad and Tobago for COVID-19 will be placed before Cabinet, and that is likely to be Tuesday or Wednesday. And following that, it will be shared with you, members of the media, for this and disseminated to the public, throughout the public service, throughout state enterprises, and be made available to trade unions and the private sector.
Just from that point, persons from the essential services, military and police, are asking if it's available to them.
Essential services operate very differently. And when Minister of Labour would have read out the release, he would have noted that they did not list in the category. So I had brief discussions in my capacity as CPO with the presidents of the 2nd Division Associations of the Police Service, the Fire Service, and Prison Service, just to alert them about the work that is being done and to get a perspective from them. Yesterday, there were brief discussions. In my view, as an ordinary citizen, I'm enlightened and heartened about their responses. They understand the responsibility of the essential services, as they have to be able to respond to any crisis that we have to treat with. Of course, there's ongoing dialogue with the Ministry of National Security to address some of the issues that they have highlighted. And I know the PS of Ministry of National Security is working closely with the institutional leaders of those organizations to address those issues. So to a large extent, we have to remember that those institutions operate differently, and how we treat with them in a crisis, they have to treat with how they're able to roster the people. Those are not organizations that work an 8-to-4 system. They work on a 24-hour basis. There's an opportunity to roster people. There's an opportunity to be able to ensure that those organizations continue to work. We have understood and appreciated that there will be challenges that persons who are working in those environments would exist, and they will feel those hardships. But the reality is we have to remember that those are institutions that we expect to be able to respond in crises. And if it is the state of readiness heightens to the next level, we would want to ensure as a country that those are institutions, those workers are able to come out to support the national interest. So we did not include them for pandemic leave. However, in the guidelines that is going to Cabinet, they are included because persons from those entities could possibly be tested for COVID-19. And in that regard, they will not lose any benefits. Since, for instance, they will be able to go on their sick leave, so they have that. They will be able to go on extended sick leave with full pay, and there will be no second or third order effects in terms of an impact on pensions, gratuity, acting appointments, promotion, and increments for those individuals. So they have been included in that context. But for the purposes of pandemic leave, in view of what is happening with the closure of schools for 1 week in the first instance, it would not apply to them.
Kerry Peters for the Newsday. All of these provisions seem to apply to traditional employees in traditional employment situations. Are there any provisions or guidelines for self-employed people who may fall sick and require either quarantine or self-isolation?
Well, self-employed people, I mean, it's self-explanatory. If, for example, and that issue did engage the committee's attention, and we did engage in discussions. If someone is self-employed, that person is responsible for himself or herself like any other member of the community, and therefore must be guided by the guidelines issued by the Ministry of Health, by the Ministry of National Security. If, however, that self-employed person is an employer, perhaps employing 1 or 2 persons, then the guidelines will apply.
Just to follow up, in other countries, in the UK and other places, they are in fact having discussions and making provisions for income support for people who are self-employed and for all categories of workers. So is that enough? Can we look, is there any further consideration to be given to this particular category of employees?
That is a matter that would have to engage the attention of the Cabinet in considering the document that is going before Cabinet.
Hi, good morning. Nicholas Suchman Singh from TV6. Just to go back a little bit, are we to understand that employees have to exhaust all their sick leave in order to have pandemic leave given to them? And who exactly is paying this pandemic leave? Is it coming up from NIS? Is the employer going to give these reimbursements? How exactly? And just another question as I'm on it. How are private institutions going to be monitored for non-unionized employees who may be taken advantage of? How exactly are they going to be monitored to make sure that they aren't taken advantage of in this?
All right. Before I invite the CPO to respond to your question, you would recall in my statement, I did indicate that we are all in this together. We cannot monitor all the employers out there. We have to appeal to their sense of compassion and their sense of understanding what is being faced in this country, and to their sense of fairness, to treat their employees fairly and to follow the guidelines as far as is practicable that we have set. With regards to the other questions, I would invite the CPO to respond in terms of the utilization of the sick leave.
Thank you, Minister. So, for workers who have sick leave, it is recommended that sick leave eligibility, it is recommended to utilize the sick leave eligibility. That is why it's there.
But that would mean for the rest of the year they don't have any sick leave, so that means they won't be able to get sick in order to be compensated for that time.
If there's a situation where somebody has exhausted their sick leave, they have gone on an extension of sick leave with full pay, and they have no more sick leave eligibility, for public officers, the mechanism exists where persons can still go on further extensions of sick leave with full pay. A permanent secretary or head of department, statutory authorities under the Statutory Authorities Act and the THA have the ability, those permanent secretaries have the ability, it's a devolved function that they could continue to accept applications from employees who have cases of getting ill again, going on sick leave, and recommendations can be made to classify that leave as extensions of sick leave with full pay. So it's not a situation where in the future, if somebody becomes ill again, there's no provision for them to lose compensation. There are mechanisms in place that currently exist for further extensions of sick leave with full pay.
And I know where your thoughts are likely to be with regards to the private sector. I would advise the private sector, where there are recognized majority unions, that is an issue that both the recognized RMUs and the employers ought to engage in dialogue to arrive at a mutually agreeable position. For working environment where there are no unions, then we would advise the employers to seek to make contact with our conciliation unit, where our very experienced public officers, headed by the Chief Labor Relations Officer, Ms. Sabina Gomez, they are ready, able, and willing to assist them and to guide them in that regard.
I just want to ask a question here from social media. Someone needs clarification. Apparently didn't understand. They are asking, do you have to be tested positive to get pandemic leave? So we just want that to be clear to them.
No. So pandemic leave, and just to reiterate again, so So I'll go back. So if we go back to sick leave eligibility, so if somebody is being sent on sick leave because of a suspected case of COVID-19, it's either you're showing any signs or symptoms of COVID-19, because there's a process for the labs to be able to discern if you're positive or not. So from a health risk management perspective, if you have identified an individual in the workplace who are showing signs and symptoms of COVID-19 and they'll be sent home, it is recommended they utilize sick leave eligibility. The process of the certification or the positive testing of COVID-19 will come in thereafter. So we'll have to do simultaneous engagement. That will come in after. For pandemic leave, you qualify for pandemic leave if you have no sick leave eligibility. It is for those categories of workers who have nothing. For example, the short-term employees and those temporary workers who only have sick leave eligibility but do not currently have a provision for extended sick leave. In the current circumstance, where schools will be closing the next week, and for those parents who do not have a support system and are unable to come to work, pandemic leave, that new category will be applied to them. So it's not sick leave, it's not extension of sick leave, it's not leave of absence in the ground of public policy if you're a contract worker. Pandemic leave will be applied in this current circumstance in the next week for all categories of workers who will not be coming to work because they have to take care of the children.
I would also want at this point in time, because it has been drawn to my attention that there are certain schools, certain institutions who are demanding that their teachers or tutors report for duty. I would like to remind those managers of the statement by the Honorable Prime Minister that all schools, universities, teaching institutions are to be closed for 1 week. And I hope that they will be guided by such a directive.
Is there a limit in terms of pandemic leave? I know school is out for 1 week. If the situation is fluid, it may change. Does it have a limit on the amount of pandemic leave one can take, an employee can take?
So the committee and the technical officers didn't consider a definite time limit, and it has been left open because we don't know how long this will occur. So to say 2 weeks would not suffice if there's an extension, for example, for this to occur for a further month. So the provision exists, and that's the important thing. There's a provision that will take into account if there's a further extension to the issue. The issue is to ensure that the provisions are compassionate, it is in good faith, there's a level of cooperation, and that we protect the rights of those workers, and more importantly, by extension, their families, and there is no undue hardship on those individuals. So it is not recommended that a timeline be put on something like pandemic leave.
I would just like to restate that separate and apart from this specific issue of guidelines governing this 1 week closure of school, there are, and I would want to repeat, draft guidelines which a cabinet-appointed committee, the cabinet appointed a committee of which I was mandated to chair. The other members of that committee are the Honorable Camille Robinson Regis, Minister of Social Development and Family Services, the Honorable Dr. Nayan Dolly, who is the Minister of Culture Community Development, the Senator, the Honorable Paula Gopi-Skoon, Minister of Trade and Industry, the Minister in the Office of the Attorney General, Honorable Fitzgerald Hines, my own colleague, Minister of Communication, Senator the Honorable Donna Cox, and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honorable Ayanna Webster Roy. Those are the members of the committee, ably supported by technical teams led by our Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labor, Ms. Natalie Willis, Mr. Val Lewis, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of National Security, and his team, and the County Medical Officer of Health and the team of the Ministry of Health, ably supported by Major General Retired Smart, CEO of the ODPM, Executive Director of OSHA and her team. And of course the CPO, the CPO and his team, so that this committee had wide-ranging technical support where very broad and lengthy discussion. We may have spent over 12 hours in discussion over the period Friday and Saturday and yesterday, ensuring that we would have looked at all possible scenarios to develop these guidelines. And as I said, and I would want to repeat, either tomorrow or Tuesday, this document will go before the National Tripartite Advisory Council, of whose members comprise of members of the business sector, of which the Employers Consultative Association is represented by its president, as well as the labor sector, where you have members from the joint trade union, NATOC and FITON are also seated at the table. We also have representative of the business sector from Tobago on the council, and also representation from the Tobago House of Assembly, so that very detailed and robust discussion will ensue on this document, no doubt. And what will emerge will be the final draft that will be considered by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, either on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Does the draft policy, have any considerations for employers who will no doubt be impacted by these absenteeism due to, the need for workers to stay home to take care of their children, and those who may contract the COVID-19? Does it contain any financial measures that can assist employers who may no doubt be financially affected by this?
I am quite sure that you're well aware that my remit is a labor remit. That consideration is within the responsibility of the Minister of Finance, who I have absolutely no doubt will consider all those concerns and will bring it to Cabinet for consideration. My remit revolves around the workplace.
So just to clarify, is the expectation that businesses, follow-on question, is the expectation that businesses pay for all of this initially, and or is the government paying for this leave? Just to clarify.
I don't think there's need for clarity. In the normal course of things, employers meet and treat with different type of leaves.
But the current situation is hardly normal, Minister. So,
we are in highly abnormal circumstances, and all of us have to manage the sacrifices that are placed before us. But I will not want to comment more on that. I would leave those issues to the Minister of Finance.
Minister, I don't know who will answer this question. We have persons who are employed who have compromised immune systems, cancer patients, pregnant women. One of the
HIV.
things... All of these things. One of the things the WHO recommended was social distancing. And, with these persons who have compromised immune systems, they may want to stay away from the public in order to prevent catching COVID-19. What sort of implementations would be there, or preparations for their desire to stay home in order to not catch this? And another thing, what elements would be there in order for probably the Ministry of Labour to announce the closure of non-essential services?
Sorry, can you repeat? I was a bit distracted there for a moment.
What elements will need to be present in order for the Ministry of Labour to probably ask for the closure of non-essential services?
That is not a decision that is within the competence of the Minister of Labour. That is a decision that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet would arrive at. I'm afraid I can't give you what you are looking for at this point in time.
Minister, where is national insurance in all of these discussions?
in contextually?
Well, I was thinking about NIS being accessing situations like maternity leave, etc. So I was just thinking about the pandemic leave and whether they form part of the committee that came up with these provisions.
Well, let me say that there are certain provisions I understand with regards to employers paying out different types of leave. And that is why the advice is where there are RMUs, recognized majority unions, they are to sit with the employers and work out the specific situations. It is only those non-unionized environment that we are advising should contact the conciliation unit. So I wouldn't want to preempt what an RMU and an employer may arrive at as a mutually acceptable position. No. Let me invite Dr. Bess in terms of those persons who, as he said, they may have cancer or HIV, and what would the advice be for them?
Good morning. Good morning. I think you've raised a good point that these persons would be deemed higher risk for developing COVID, and so there would need to be a discussion with the employers as to whether alternative working arrangements could be made in terms of working from home, using technology to allow them to continue to contribute to society while keeping themselves safe.
Okay, last question from me at least. As far we know as far as sick leave is concerned, there is a certain system that's put in place. You sign a form, you make a request or have a discussion with your manager or whatnot. All right. As far as the pandemic leave is concerned, would you be using the same forms? What kind of paperwork would be involved in that as well? Do you sign a regular sick leave form or something like that?
That's easy.
Sure. Thank you. We'll be sending out some guidance on that. It's not the same sick leave form because it's not sick leave. It's pandemic leave. All right. So we'll be sending out. So the CPO's office will be issuing a circular post cabinet's decision on the guidelines, and we'll have a retroactive date to consider with effect from tomorrow to cover the period of any employee who does not come to work in the next week in the first instance. All right, so it's different from sick leave, and the guidance will be provided.
Suchman Singh from TV6 once again. Right, so we have an incident where a family member has COVID-19 and the entire family has to be quarantined. Members of that family may be employed, but they're not sick. What provisions are there for them?
While, okay, so members of the media, I want you all to be aware that I'm treading a really tight line here, and you all are really experts at pulling people over the lines. I can't make a pronouncement on the guidelines that are encapsulated in this document. But let me assure you that yes, such a scenario has been considered and a recommendation has been made to cover it.
Okay, do we have a final question? I'm happy to know that you all understand everything that was said here today, and we expect to see responsible reporting, because all of us, we are all in this together. And I urge everyone to be responsible in dealing with this unusual situation that we are in. We may have another press conference later this week, so stay tuned, and thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy your Sunday. Thank you.